to another. As we move down towards the bottom, really, it's the smart choices piece. And if you look at the status of where we are today, we've currently installed 2.4 million meters of the 4.4 and estimate completion of that by the middle of next year. So, Dave, to answer your question of how this plays in, when we originally set up SoSmart, we broke it into teams to handle various parts of it. One of those teams that was developed was a data management, integration, and security team. So early on, we recognized that that was going to be a critical component of all the work we do. And from that, we developed a business case, and it's a business case that doesn't have a payback short term. It has a payback of preparing you for the future. So we went forward with the business case and said we would like to do a process where we determine what we have in place today as it relates to our systems. We determine where we think we're going to be, and we had a lot of different data points from other utilities who had done various pilots, and then we determine what that gap is. And so once we have all those things, when the projects come where information needs to be shared from one functional area to another, we have the framework and the architecture in place to do that. But what is critical in this slide is that the management of the data is foundational to solving some of the problems that you'll encounter in the future. This, again, is just background to show you, and there's data behind all of these points on there, and I'm sure everyone on the call wants to know where they are on the chart. All I can show you is where we believe Southern Company is, and it's not good or bad to be at any one position on this slide. It's just where you are and why you're there. So if you look at where Southern Company is, we're very high on customers enabled, and that's because of the number of meters we have rolled out, and we continue to roll those out, as well as the number of devices that we have on the grid. As you move towards the bottom axis, it says maturity model. You can really think of this as integrated capabilities deployed. And so there are a number of companies who have tried a lot of things, and as they try them, some work and some don't, but that's the difference in the two places on the axis. And if you look in the bottom left, that's really someone who hasn't started yet to do the kinds of things that we're talking about. So we've got a significant investment in hardware now. We're currently figuring out what we're going to do in terms of a data management perspective and analytics perspective to move up to the right-hand side. You only want to move where you gain value, and so each company will find itself in a different place because of regulation or whatever situation they find themselves in. We did a lot of work. We've been working on this for over 6 months now. And when we talk to people about it, oftentimes we've got a lot of confused looks, and especially when we talk to non-information technology people. So we took one slide and boiled up everything that we thought we could into the shortest possible list to tell you what are the key elements of data management and which ones are important and what could other people understand, especially business executives, because IT is not their job. And what we found is, and we're going to go over these in more detail in further slides, is integration. To get information from one place to another where it's never been shared before, it's critical. But even before that, a governance system in place where there's accountability and responsibility for the timeliness of that information delivery as well as the quality of that information delivery. Remember, people are going to be making decisions off of this information that they could not make before. And then as we move higher up into the food chain, we've got business analytics. And in this area, there are things we do today, there are things we know we want to do, and there are things we haven't even thought of that we'll be able to do with this information. So in this particular point, what I'll say is we've had a number of different industry experts from other industries come into us that are further evolved down the analytical path to tell us what they did and why they did it. So that's provided some key insight for us. And then the last thing is really the data infrastructure or the information infrastructure that's required to make all this work. So just a quick practical example. When we first did the business case on AMI, it was based solely on reading the meter. And so that's where we find ourselves today, is reading the meter, as well as some other functionality as well. But as we move into what's going on today, we've seen, as we've gotten that information and as it's matured, people have started to think of other ways they want to use this information. And so Fortunately for us, we had begun all this work before, because now we're ready to take on some of those projects as they relate to integrating this information to other areas outside of metering and billing. And in the future, there's really no telling what we're going to use this information for. So you have to prepare for all that. And I'll speak briefly about these because you all know well that governance is required to make this successful. So you can operate in a specific functional area and be extremely successful, and they have governance typically in those areas. But once you cut across to another functional area, you have to have a governance system in place when you're going to be making decisions off of this information. And really what you want is the accountability and the responsibility. You don't want to assume ownership for someone else's data. You want them to assume that ownership and have a structure in place where you have a consistent delivery of that information. So for us, it's a hybrid approach. It's not a fully centralized approach. It's a coordinated centrally approach that has the ownership and responsibility of the information in the business unit where it's generated. And this is where we're all heading. So many of us started in standard reports of what happened over the last 30 days, and we moved to alerts, and now we're heading into a place where we have predictive modeling. So if you look at where this could be important, if you look at the maintenance scheduling, scheduled versus predictive, there's a huge benefit in that. Power purchasing, capacity planning. There are so many things that we can do with this data. But to be able to do that, you have to think of some of those things, and even most of those things, I would argue, before you put the data infrastructure in place. Otherwise, your historical information will be of little to no value. So it's important for us to think ahead and plan. A very high-level chart, we have wall posters of this kind of information as it relates to the Southern Company architecture. And I would suggest that most of you need to start this if you haven't already, which is really understand what's coming and then map that against your current infrastructure, because face it, there's no way that you'll get funding or would you want to replace all of your legacy systems that are in place. So what you have to do is figure out how they all interoperate and then integrate all those systems. And so this is really inputs come in and they're communicated. And if you look at most of the functionality exists today in most utilities, and all we're doing is expanding that functionality. In terms of data management services around the smart grid data and the analytical engines, those are new for us. And so those are the things that we'll spend building out. But the only way we know that is from going through this process of taking inventory. So here's the slide I think you all came to see. And I'm only going to touch on a few points, but you're welcome to think about all of them. The first one for us is these are the significant findings of this entire 6-month process for us. And I think you've got to be cognizant of the first one in most of our companies, and that really is the cultural impact of doing some of the things that we're talking about. And you know, this company is over 100 years old and has been doing information technology for well over 40 years. So you have to acknowledge that, and you have to figure out how you navigate and utilize that to your advantage. And so that's a big challenge here. Second one I'll mention is really securing the grid. So while it's been easy to control security, or relatively easy inside a computer room and inside a building, now you're talking about taking security to the next level where planning is really important and the ongoing operations and monitoring of those activities is critical. And governance, again, while governance sometimes was required, it wasn't required on the scale and coordination it is today. And then the last point on here, I will tell you was valuable for us was getting other industry experts from financial services, from banking, from retail, telecom, to come in and talk to us about their evolution as they went through a transformation.